The mortal queen's voice cut through the grand hall like a blade through silk, and 200 pairs of ancient eyes fixed on her with the sort of stillness that preceded violence.
"You will not kill a child for the crime of hunger,"
Clara Bartholomew said, each word precisely shaped, her hands steady at her sides despite the trembling she felt in her knees. "Not while I stand in this court, not while I wear your ring." The boy in question, 15 and gaunt, knelt between two guards at the center of the hall. He'd stolen 3 vials from the blood stores. Enough to feed his dying sister. Enough by the law of this court to warrant execution. Yavuz Bathory sat upon the obsidian throne, white hair falling past his shoulders, his skin the pale luminescence of moonlight on snow. 6 months ago he had been a stranger, a name spoken in whispers across the mortal kingdoms of the Caucasus, the vampire king who ruled the mountain holds and the dark cities beneath them. 6 months ago their marriage had been a treaty written in vows, a bridge between his immortal court and her father's failing human kingdom. Now she stood before him and his assembled nobility, contradicting him for the first time in front of them all. The silence stretched. Someone near the back of the hall shifted, armor creaking. The sound echoed like thunder. Yavuz's eyes, dark as winter nights, moved from the boy to Clara. His expression gave nothing away, it never did. In 6 months of marriage she had learned to read the minute tells, the slight tightening at the corner of his mouth that meant displeasure, the almost imperceptible lift of his brow that signaled interest. Now she saw neither. His face was a mask of regal composure. "The law is clear," Lord Casimir said from his place among the assembled nobles, his voice sharp with satisfaction. "Theft from the blood stores threatens the entire court. The winter stores are sacred. The penalty is death." "The law," Clara said, not taking her eyes from her husband, "was written when blood was scarce and the court was at war. We are not at war, the stores are full." This boy took 3 vials to save his sister, who lies dying in the lower city. He did not sell them, he did not waste them. He used them to preserve a life, a mortal life, Lady Isadora interjected, her white hair coiled in elaborate braids, her smile cold. "Surely your Majesty understands the distinction." Clara's jaw tightened. She had learned in these 6 months that half the court hoped she would fail. Hoped she would prove too weak, too human, too temporary to matter. They wanted Yavuz to set her aside, to take a vampire bride befitting his station. "I understand," Clara said quietly, "that this court claims to rule with justice. That your king has spent 3 centuries building a realm where law matters more than appetite. If we execute a boy for loving his sister, what justice is that? What law?" Yavuz rose from his throne. The movement was fluid, unhurried, but every vampire in the hall tensed. He descended the 3 steps of the dais, and Clara held her ground as he approached. He was taller than her by half a foot, and when he stood before her she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. For a long moment he simply looked at her. The entire court held its breath. Then Yavuz turned to face the assembly. "My wife," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the vaulted space, "is correct." The silence that followed was absolute. Clara felt it like a physical weight pressing down from all sides. "The boy acted out of love, not greed," Yavuz continued. "The law allows for clemency in cases of extraordinary circumstance. I grant it here. He will serve the court for 1 year to repay the debt, and his sister will be given the care she requires." He looked at the boy, who stared up at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "You will work in the blood stores under supervision. You will learn why they are sacred, and you will learn discipline. Do you accept these terms?" "Yes," the boy whispered. "Yes, Your Majesty. Thank you. I thank the Queen," Yavuz said. "She is the one who spoke for you." He turned back to Clara, and for just an instant she saw something in his eyes. Not anger, something else. Something that made her breath catch. Then he offered her his arm, and she took it, and they walked together from the hall while the court remained frozen in silence. It was only when they reached the private corridor beyond that Clara felt her legs begin to shake in earnest. "You're trembling," Yavuz observed. "I just contradicted you in front of your entire court," Clara said. "I thought you might—" She stopped herself. "Might what?" His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "I don't know. Be angry, or I am not angry. Then what are you?" He stopped walking, turned to face her. In the dim corridor, lit only by the sconces set into the stone walls, his features were sharp planes and shadows. "Impressed," he said finally. "You were right. The law does allow for clemency. I had forgotten that in my certainty." He paused. "You have a gift for seeing what is just, rather than what is merely legal. It is a quality I value." Clara stared at him. "You're not upset that I challenged you?" "You did not challenge me. You challenged the law's application. There is a difference." He resumed walking, and she hurried to keep pace. "The court will be unsettled. Some will see it as weakness. You should be prepared for that. I can handle gossip. Can you?" He glanced at her, one brow slightly raised. "Lady Isadora has already been spreading rumors that you are too soft for the throne. This will give her more ammunition." "Let her spread what she likes," Clara said. "I'd rather be soft than cruel." "You are neither," Yavuz said. "You are just, remember that." They reached the door to her chambers, his adjoining. In 6 months of marriage they had shared meals, shared conversations, shared the public duties of the court. They had not shared a bed. That had been part of their agreement, the terms negotiated through intermediaries before she ever left her father's kingdom. She would be his queen in name and law, would learn to rule beside him, but intimacy would come only if they both wished it. She had thought it a mercy at the time. Now some nights, it felt like a wall she didn't know how to cross. "Thank you," Clara said, "for listening to me, for letting me win." Something flickered across his face, there and gone too quickly to identify. "It was not a matter of letting you win. You were right. Right should win." He inclined his head, formal as always. "Rest well, Clara." He turned and entered his own chambers, and Clara stood alone in the corridor for a long moment before going into hers. Inside, her lady's maid, Petra, was waiting. Petra was one of the few mortals who served in the upper castle, a gift from Clara's father, a familiar face in a court of strangers. "The whole castle is talking about what you did," Petra said as she helped Clara out of the heavy formal gown. "They say you made the king bow to you." "I did no such thing," Clara said sharply. "He made his own decision." "Well, however it happened, the mortal servants are calling you a hero. That boy, Mikhail, his family has been trying to find a way to thank you." Clara sank onto the edge of her bed. Now that the adrenaline was fading, exhaustion rushed in to replace it. "I don't want thanks. I just want fairness." "In a vampire court," Petra's voice was skeptical. "That's asking for the moon, my lady." "Maybe," Clara said. "But if I don't ask for it, who will?" Petra said nothing, just helped her into her nightdress and brushed out her dark hair. When Clara finally climbed beneath the covers, she lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the way Yavuz had looked at her in the hall, the way he'd said, "You're right," without hesitation, without qualification, as if her opinion mattered as much as his own, as if she were truly his queen, not just in name. It was more than she'd expected when she'd arrived here, a terrified bride stepping into a realm of immortals and shadows. It was more than she'd let herself hope for, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but dreams found her instead, filled with dark eyes and pale skin, and a voice that said her name like it meant something. She had not meant to fall in love with him. It had happened anyway, slowly, like ice melting in spring. 1,000 small moments accumulated into something she couldn't ignore. The morning after the argument in the grand hall, Clara woke to find a note slipped under her door. The handwriting was precise and elegant. "The boy's sister is recovering. I have assigned a physician to monitor her progress. You were right to speak for them." Clara traced the letters with her fingertips, something warm unfurling in her chest. She dressed quickly, choosing a simpler gown than the court required, and made her way down to the lower levels of the castle where the servants' quarters were located. The guards let her pass without question, though she saw their surprise. Queens did not typically visit the service areas. She found Mikhail in the blood stores, already at work under the supervision of the quartermaster. When he saw her, he immediately dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty, I don't have words. You saved my life. You saved Natasha." "Stand up," Clara said gently. "Please." He rose, and she saw that he was taller than she'd realized, gangly in the way of boys not yet grown into their frames. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "How is your sister?" "Better. The physician came this morning. He says she'll live." His voice cracked. "Because of you. Because you loved her enough to risk everything," Clara corrected. "That kind of courage is rare. Don't waste it." The quartermaster, an ancient vampire named Gregor with scars crossing his pale face, watched the exchange with an unreadable expression. When Clara turned to leave, he stopped her. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "what you did yesterday, most of the court thinks you're a fool. But those of us who remember when the king first took power, when he fought to build something better than what came before, we remember why we followed him. You reminded us." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I only did what was right." "Yes," Gregor said, "you did." She left the blood stores with that strange warmth still glowing in her chest. But as she climbed back toward the main levels of the castle, the feeling began to fade. Because between her and the residential floors stood the court, and the court was full of vampires who did think she was a fool. Lady Isadora found her in the corridor outside the library. "Your Majesty," she said, the title dripping with false sweetness. "How charitable of you to visit the servants, though I wonder if your time might be better spent learning the actual duties of your position." Clara stopped walking. "Was there something you needed, Lady Isadora?" "Only to offer some friendly advice." Isadora moved closer, and Clara fought the urge to step back. The vampire was beautiful in the way of predators, all sharp edges and calculated grace. "The court is unsettled after yesterday's display. Some are questioning whether His Majesty has grown too fond of mortal sentimentality. Are you among them?" "I am concerned," Isadora said, "for the stability of the realm. The king has ruled for 3 centuries with strength and certainty. He cannot afford to appear weak." "He appeared just," Clara said evenly. If you cannot see the difference, that's your failing, not his. Isidora's smile hardened. You are young, your majesty. You do not understand the delicate balance required to rule immortals. They respect strength, they despise softness. What you call justice, they will call weakness, and in time they will turn on both of you. Then let them turn, Clara said. I'd rather rule with integrity than fear. How noble, Isidora said. I wonder how long you'll maintain that position when the consequences become clear. She dipped into a mocking curtsy and glided away, leaving Clara standing alone in the corridor with her heart pounding. That evening, Clara dined with Yavuz in his private study. It had become their custom, these quiet meals away from the court's scrutiny. He seemed to prefer the solitude, and truthfully so did she. Lady Isidora cornered me today, Clara said, pushing food around her plate. She thinks I'm making you look weak. Yavuz set down his wine glass. He didn't eat mortal food often, but he would drink wine when they dined together. A small courtesy. Isidora has thought me weak for various reasons over the past century. I have not yet crumbled under her disapproval. She said the court will turn on us. Some will, some already have. He studied her across the table. Does that frighten you? Clara considered the question. Yes, she admitted, but not enough to change what I did. Something shifted in his expression, a softening so subtle she almost missed it. Good. Fear has its place. But it should not rule you. What rules you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He was quiet for a long moment. Duty, he said finally. The promise I made when I took the throne to build something better than what my predecessor created. A realm where law matters more than power. Where even the weakest have some protection. That's why you granted clemency, Clara said, understanding clicking into place. Not just because I was right, but because it aligned with what you've been building all along. Yes, then why did it take me saying it for you to see it? Yavuz's mouth quirked, not quite a smile, but close. Because I had grown comfortable with the law as it was written. I had stopped questioning whether it served its purpose. You questioned it. You reminded me that law should be living, not static. Clara felt that warmth again spreading through her chest. We make a good team then. We do, he agreed, and the weight he gave those words made her breath catch. Later, alone in her chambers, Clara tried to remember when exactly it had started, this feeling in her chest whenever he looked at her, when the fear had transformed into something else entirely. She traced back through the 6 months, their wedding, formal and cold, conducted in the ancient chapel beneath the mountain. The first awkward dinners where they'd sat in near silence, neither knowing what to say. The day he'd found her in the library, surrounded by books on vampire law, and had sat down to explain the nuances she was struggling with. His patience as she learned to navigate court politics. The way he'd defended her when Lord Casimir had made a snide comment about mortal intelligence. The morning he'd noticed she was homesick and had the cook prepare dishes from her homeland. 100 small kindnesses offered quietly, without fanfare. She had fallen in love with him somewhere in the accumulation of those moments, and she had no idea if he felt anything in return. He was kind to her, yes. Respectful, supportive. But kind was not love, respect was not desire. He treated her as a partner, valued her judgment. But there was always a distance between them, a careful space he never tried to cross, perhaps he never would. Perhaps to him she would always be the mortal queen, the treaty bride, useful but temporary in the scope of his immortal life. The thought sat heavy in her chest as she drifted towards sleep. The next 3 weeks passed in uneasy tension. The court remained unsettled, whispers following Clara through the corridors. Lord Casimir and Lady Isidora seemed to be the center of a growing faction, one that made no secret of their displeasure with the queen's influence. Yavuz, for his part, gave no ground. He included Clara in every council meeting, deferred to her judgment on matters of mortal welfare, and publicly supported her decisions. When Lord Casimir suggested that mortal concerns should be handled by mortal administrators rather than troubling the queen with them, Yavuz had fixed him with a look that could freeze blood. The queen's judgment on mortal affairs is sound, he'd said, his voice soft and lethal. Unlike yours, Casimir, which has proven historically lacking. Shall we review your administration of the Eastern Valley? I have the reports here. Casimir had backed down immediately, but the resentment in his eyes had been unmistakable. Clara tried to focus on her work. She met with the mortal administrators who managed the human populations in the territories under vampire rule. She reviewed petitions, settled disputes, and slowly began to build a network of contacts among both the mortal and immortal populations. Gregor became an unexpected ally, as did several of the older vampires who remembered the chaos before Yavuz had taken the throne. But the opposition was growing too. She could feel it, a pressure building like a storm about to break. It broke on a cold morning in early autumn. Yavuz was away, traveling to the northern border to negotiate a territorial agreement with the neighboring vampire lord. He'd asked Clara if she wanted to come, but she'd declined. There was too much work here, too many things that needed her attention. He'd looked at her for a long moment before leaving, something unreadable in his eyes. "Send word if you need me. I can be back in a day. I'll be fine," she'd assured him. "It's just a few days." She regretted those words 12 hours after his departure. Lord Casimir and Lady Isidora appeared at her door just after dawn, accompanied by 4 other nobles whose names Clara knew but whose loyalty she'd never been certain of. "Your Majesty," Casimir said, his tone falsely apologetic, "we apologize for the early intrusion, but a matter has arisen that requires immediate attention." Clara, still in her dressing gown with Petra frantically trying to make her presentable, felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "What matter?" "A blood crime," Isidora said. "One that falls under the Queen's jurisdiction in the King's absence. I am not qualified to judge. The law is quite clear," Casimir interrupted, producing a scroll. "In the King's absence, the Queen presides over the blood court. It is your right and your duty." Clara took the scroll with numb fingers. She'd read about the blood court, the ancient tribunal that handled the most serious crimes in vampire society. It hadn't occurred to her that she might actually have to preside over one. "What is the crime?" "Illegal farming of mortals," Isidora said, watching Clara's face carefully. "A serious offense. The accused is waiting in the judgment hall." Clara's mouth went dry. Farming meant keeping mortals as blood slaves, breeding them in captivity, treating them as livestock. It was one of the practices Yavuz had outlawed when he took power, one of the reforms that had nearly cost him his throne. "I need time to review the case. The law allows for no delay," Casimir said smoothly. "The accused must be judged within 1 day of discovery, or the charges are dismissed. We only just uncovered the evidence last night. If you wait, a criminal walks free." It was a trap. Clara could see it clearly. If she judged too harshly, the court would condemn her as cruel. If she judged too leniently, they'd call her weak. And if she refused to judge at all, she'd be failing in her duty, proving them right that she was unfit for the throne. But she couldn't let a criminal walk free because she was afraid of being judged herself. "Give me 2 hours to review the evidence," she said. "Then I'll convene the court." "As your Majesty wishes," Casimir said, and the satisfaction in his voice made her skin crawl. The next 2 hours were a blur. Clara read through the evidence documents, reviewed the relevant laws, and tried to ignore the panic clawing at her throat. Petra brought her tea she couldn't drink and breakfast she couldn't eat. "Send word to the king," Petra urged. "He said to send if you needed him. He's negotiating a treaty. I can't interrupt that for my own uncertainty." Clara set down the papers and pressed her hands to her temples. "I have to do this. It's my responsibility. It's a trap, I know. But that doesn't change what I have to do." The judgment hall was smaller than the grand hall, more intimate and somehow more menacing for it. It was built in the old style, all black stone and sharp angles, designed to make the accused feel the weight of justice bearing down. Clara sat in the judgment seat, a chair that seemed far too large for her, and tried to project confidence she didn't feel. The court filed in, more than she'd expected. Word had spread. They wanted to see if the mortal queen would break. The accused was brought in, and Clara felt her stomach turn. He was one of the nobles, Lord Dimitri, an ancient vampire who had served in the court since before Yavuz's time. He stood proud and defiant, his white hair pulled back, his pale face expressionless. "Lord Dimitri," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You are accused of illegal farming of mortals in violation of the king's law. How do you answer?" "I answer that the law is foolish and the accusation a manipulation." His voice was cold. "But yes, I kept mortals in my estate for blood supply. I have done so for 500 years. I did not stop simply because our current king decided to soften." A murmur ran through the assembled court. Clara's hands tightened on the arms of the chair. "The law is clear. Farming is forbidden. The law is new. My practices are old. Tradition should weigh heavier than the whims of reformers." "The king's law is not a whim," Clara said sharply. "It is the foundation of this realm's justice." "How would you know?" Dimitri sneered. "You have been here 6 months. I have been here since this mountain was first hollowed out. I do not recognize the authority of a mortal child to judge me." The murmur grew louder. Clara saw Casimir and Isidora watching her, waiting for her to falter. She thought about running, thought about refusing to judge, claiming she needed more time, more advice, her husband's guidance. Then she thought about Mikhail, about the boy who'd stolen to save his sister. She thought about the mortals Dimitri had kept in cages, breeding them like animals. She thought about what Yavuz would do. "Your age does not place you above the law," Clara said, her voice ringing clear through the hall. "Your tradition does not excuse your crime. The law is the law, and it applies to all, from the newest mortal subject to the eldest vampire lord." She paused. "I find you guilty as charged." The hall erupted, Dimitri's face contorted with rage. "You dare! The sentence for farming is exile," Clara continued, raising her voice over the chaos. "You will be stripped of your title and lands. You will leave this realm within 3 days and will not return on pain of final death." "This is outrageous," Dimitri roared. "I demand an appeal to the king." The king, Clara said, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest, has made his position on farming abundantly clear. I am enforcing his law, not contradicting it. There will be no appeal. She stood, and somehow her legs held her. This court is dismissed. She walked from the hall with her head high, but the moment she reached the corridor beyond, her knees buckled. Petra caught her, held her up. I need to get to my chambers, Clara whispered. They made it just barely. Once the door closed behind them, Clara collapsed onto the edge of her bed, shaking violently. You were magnificent, Petra said. I was terrified. You were both. Petra poured her wine with hands that shook. The whole court is talking about it. Half think you're mad, half think you're brilliant. What does the half that thinks I'm mad plan to do about it? I don't know, my lady, but you should send word to the king now. He needs to know what's happened. Clara nodded numbly. She wrote the letter herself, her handwriting shaky, explaining what had occurred. She sent it with the fastest messenger, marked urgent. Then she waited. The next day was torture. The castle hummed with tension. Dmitri was preparing to leave, loudly proclaiming that the court had fallen into chaos, ruled by a mortal who knew nothing of their ways. Casimir and Isadora were notably quiet, which frightened Clara more than if they'd been vocal. She'd expected them to protest her judgment, to demand she reverse it. Their silence suggested they were planning something else. She tried to work, tried to focus on the daily business of governance, but her mind kept drifting. Had she made the right choice? Had she been too harsh, too lenient? Would Yavuz support her decision or overturn it, humiliating her in front of the court? The uncertainty was agony. Yavuz returned on the third day, just as dusk was falling. Clara was in the library when she heard the commotion in the courtyard, the sounds of arrival. She stood, smoothed her skirts, and tried to prepare herself for whatever was coming. He found her there among the books. He still wore his traveling clothes, dust on his boots. He must have come straight to her. Clara. She turned. His face was unreadable as always, but there was something in his eyes, an intensity she'd never seen before. You received my letter, she said. I did. He crossed the room to her, and she held her ground. You presided over the blood court. I had to. The law required it. You judged Dmitri guilty and sentenced him to exile. Yes. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. He was guilty. The evidence was clear. I enforced your law, I know. Yavuz stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the sharp precision of his features. The judgment was sound. The sentence was appropriate. You did well. The relief that flooded through her was so intense she felt lightheaded. Then why do you look so angry? Because it was a trap, he said quietly. Casimir and Isadora forced you to judge while I was away, knowing you would be vulnerable. They chose Dmitri because he is well connected, because his exile would cause political damage. They thought you would either refuse to judge, proving yourself weak, or would judge incorrectly, giving them grounds to question your competence. I know it was a trap, Clara said. I walked into it with my eyes open. I didn't have a choice. You could have sent for me. You were negotiating a treaty. I couldn't interrupt that. Yes, Yavuz said, you could have. Do you understand what would have happened if you had judged incorrectly? If the court had turned against you while I was away, they could have removed you from the throne, exiled you, even— He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Even killed me, Clara finished. I know the risks. I've known them since I married you. But I couldn't let Dmitri walk free because I was afraid. You should have been afraid. You should have what? Clara felt her own anger rising now, burning away the lingering fear. Hidden behind you, refused my responsibilities, proven them right that I'm too weak, too mortal, too useless to be your queen. I would have protected you. I don't need protection from my own duties. The words came out sharper than she intended. I need you to trust that I can handle them, that I can be what this realm needs even when you're not there to catch me if I fall. They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. I do trust you, Yavuz said finally, his voice low. That is not the issue. Then what is? The issue, he said, is that I am 300 years old, and I have ruled this realm through wars and betrayals and 100 different threats. And in all that time, I have never been as frightened as I was when I read your letter and realized you were facing the blood court alone. Clara's breath caught. Why? He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, his careful mask slipped. What she saw beneath it made her heart stutter. Because you matter to me, more than is wise, more than is safe, and the thought of losing you to my enemy's machinations is unbearable. The library was silent except for her pounding heartbeat. Yavuz, I should not have left you here alone, he continued, as if he hadn't heard her. I should have canceled the treaty negotiations or brought you with me, or posted better guards. I should have anticipated that they would move against you in my absence. You can't anticipate everything. I should have. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so unlike his usual composure that it startled her. You think I let you win that argument in the Grand Hall about the boy? Yes? I didn't let you win. You did win. You were right, I was wrong, and you forced me to see it. That terrifies them, he gestured vaguely toward the rest of the castle. Because it means you have actual power here, real influence. And power draws opposition. I can handle opposition. You shouldn't have to, not alone. He stepped closer, and Clara found herself backed against the bookshelf, though he hadn't touched her. I have spent 6 months trying to maintain proper distance, trying to give you space to decide if this marriage could be real or if it would remain a political arrangement. But I am finished with distance, Clara. I am finished with patience. I nearly lost you to my own caution, and I will not make that mistake again. Clara's pulse was racing. What are you saying? I am saying, Yavuz said softly, that I want this marriage to be real. I want you to be my queen in truth, not just in name. I want your voice in my councils and your judgment in my courts and your presence in my life permanently, if you will have me. She stared at him. If I will have you, Yavuz, I have been falling in love with you for months. I thought you saw me as a duty, an obligation you were too honorable to shirk. Something blazed in his eyes. An obligation, he laughed, the sound rough and disbelieving. Clara, you have unmade me. 6 months ago I was certain in my isolation, content in my solitude. I had ruled alone for 3 centuries and expected to rule alone for 3 centuries more. And then you arrived, stubborn and brave and determined to make me see justice where I had only seen law. You argued with me, challenged me, forced me to be better than I was. How could I possibly see you as an obligation? You never said anything, Clara whispered. You never, because I am a fool, he said. Because I thought you deserved better than an immortal husband bound to an endless war of politics. Because I thought if I gave you space you might eventually care for me, and I did not want to rush you. I have cared for you, Clara said, for a long time. I just didn't think you cared back. I care so much it frightens me. He raised a hand, hesitated, then gently cupped her face. His palm was cool against her skin. I read your letter about the blood court, and all I could think was that I might return to find you harmed, that I might lose you before I ever told you the truth. Clara leaned into his touch. What truth? That I love you, Yavuz said simply. That I have loved you since the day you stood in the grand hall and fought for that boy's life, knowing the whole court might turn against you. That I want a future with you, however long you will give me. Tears prickled at Clara's eyes. However long, Yavuz, I'm mortal. I'll give you 50 years if I'm lucky, and then we will face that when it comes, he said. Or you could choose differently. She went still. What? The turning. You know it is possible. I would not ask it of you, would not pressure you. But if you wanted, if you chose it freely, to become a vampire? Clara's mind reeled. I never thought that is, I didn't think you would offer. I would offer you anything, Yavuz said quietly. Everything I have is yours if you want it, including immortality. But only if you want it, Clara. Only if you choose it for yourself, not for me. Clara's thoughts tumbled over each other. To become a vampire, to leave behind humanity, to live for centuries at his side. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like possibility opening up, vast and bright. I need time to think about that, she said. It's not a small decision. Take all the time you need. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, gentle. I will wait. I have waited 300 years. I can wait longer for you. You might not have to wait long, Clara admitted. The thought of 50 years with you sounded like paradise 5 minutes ago. Now the thought of centuries sounds better. His smile was small but genuine, and it transformed his face. She'd seen him pleased before, satisfied, but never this, never open joy. Can I kiss you? He asked. Yes, Clara breathed. Please. He lowered his mouth to hers, and the kiss was everything she'd imagined and nothing like it at the same time. Gentle but intense, careful but passionate. His hand slid into her hair and she gripped his shoulders, and for a long moment the library and the castle and the whole complicated political mess of the court faded away. There was only this, only them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara rested her forehead against his chest. We should probably address the court situation. Casimir and Isadora set that trap for a reason. They did, Yavuz agreed, his arms coming around her. They wanted to prove you were unfit. Instead, you proved yourself more than fit. But they will not stop. They see your influence as a threat. What do? We go to the council tomorrow, Yavuz said, together. And I publicly affirm every judgment you made. I stake my throne on it if necessary. Clara pulled back to look at him. That's a risk, so is inaction. They need to understand that you are not some mortal novelty I will discard. You are my queen, my partner, and any move against you is a move against me. That could fracture the court. Let it fracture, Yavuz said. I have rebuilt it before. I will rebuild it again if necessary. But I will not sacrifice you to keep false peace. Clara kissed him again, quick and fierce. I don't deserve you. You deserve better, he said. But you are unfortunately stuck with me. I can live with that, Clara said, and meant it. The council meeting the next morning was tense from the start. Clara sat beside Yavuz at the head of the table, very aware of the eyes on her. Casimir and Isadora sat across from them, along with 8 other lords and ladies who made up the ruling council. "We are here," Yavuz said without preamble, "to discuss the recent blood court judgment. I understand some of you have concerns." "Concerns?" Casimir leaned forward. "Your Majesty, with respect, the Queen sentenced Lord Dmitri to exile. He is one of the oldest members of this court, a vampire who has served for 500 years. To cast him out on the word of a mortal queen who has been here less than a year." "The Queen," Yavuz interrupted, his voice soft and lethal, "sentenced a criminal to the punishment prescribed by law. A law that I established, that this council ratified, and that Lord Dmitri knowingly violated. Or are you suggesting the law should not apply to nobles?" "I am suggesting," Casimir said carefully, "that perhaps the Queen did not fully understand the political implications of her judgment." "I understood them perfectly," Clara said, speaking up for the first time. "I understood that Lord Dmitri was guilty of farming mortals. I understood that farming is illegal under the king's law. I understood that failing to enforce that law would undermine everything this court claims to stand for. What I did not understand is how you could expect me to do anything differently. The law allows for discretion. The law allows for clemency in cases of extraordinary circumstance," Clara quoted. "Deliberately violating a 500-year-old can hardly be called extraordinary. Lord Dmitri knew the law and chose to break it. The sentence stands." Isadora spoke up, her voice smooth as silk. "Your Majesty, no one questions your integrity. But the court must be practical. Lord Dmitri has allies, family ties, political connections. Exiling him will cause significant disruption." "Good," Yavuz said flatly. "Let it disrupt. Let it send a message that the law applies to everyone. That there is no privilege ancient enough, no bloodline pure enough to place someone above justice. With respect." "Your Majesty, I am finished with respect," Yavuz said, and his voice dropped into a register that made the temperature in the room seem to plummet. "Let me be absolutely clear. The Queen judged correctly. Her ruling was sound. I support it without reservation or qualification. If Lord Dmitri's allies have a problem with that, they may bring their objections to me personally. I will be happy to explain my position in whatever detail they require." The threat in those words was unmistakable. "Furthermore," Yavuz continued, "I am formalizing the Queen's authority. She will preside over the blood court in my absence as the law allows. She will have full veto power over council decisions regarding mortal welfare. And any member of this court who moves against her, directly or indirectly, will answer to me. Are we understood?" "The silence was absolute," I asked. Yavuz said quietly, "If we are understood." "Yes, Your Majesty," the council murmured, voices overlapping. "Excellent." Yavuz stood, and Clara stood with him. "Then, unless there is other business, this meeting is concluded." They left the council chamber together, and Clara didn't let herself shake until they were safely in the corridor beyond. "That was intense," she said. "That was necessary." Yavuz glanced at her. "They needed to understand that I will not tolerate threats to you. Not veiled ones, not political ones, not any kind. You've made me a target. You were already a target. I have merely made it clear that there are consequences for taking aim." He paused. "Are you angry?" "No," Clara said, and realized she meant it. "I'm grateful, and a little terrified, but mostly grateful." "Good." He took her hand, a gesture that still felt new and precious. "Because I am not finished." "What do you mean?" "Tonight, there will be a formal dinner. The whole court will attend. And I am going to make it clear to everyone present that you are not just a treaty bride or a temporary queen. You are my chosen partner now and for as long as we both exist." Clara's pulse quickened. "That's a bold statement. It is the truth. I see no reason not to speak it." The dinner that night was the most elaborate Clara had attended since her wedding. The grand hall was filled with courtiers, all dressed in their finest. She wore a gown of deep crimson, a color Petra had chosen specifically because it would stand out against the sea of blacks and silvers the vampires favored. Yavuz wore black, as always, but he'd commissioned a new tunic with silver embroidery that caught the light. When Clara had seen him, she'd had to remind herself to breathe. They entered the hall together, and the assembled court rose. Clara took her seat beside Yavuz at the high table, and the dinner began. The meal passed in a blur of courses and conversation. Clara spoke with the nobles seated nearby, answered their careful questions, and tried to project confidence she was still building. Yavuz remained at her side, a steady presence, occasionally touching her hand or murmuring quiet comments that made her smile. When the final course was cleared away and the wine was flowing freely, Yavuz stood. The hall fell silent immediately. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly. "As you all know, 6 months ago I married Clara Bartholomew to forge an alliance between our realm and her father's kingdom. It was a political arrangement, negotiated through intermediaries, designed to bring stability to our borders." Clara's heart hammered. She had no idea where he was going with this. "That arrangement," Yavuz continued, "has evolved into something far more valuable than a simple alliance. My wife has proven herself to be not just a capable administrator but a wise and just ruler. She sees clearly where I sometimes grow blind with precedent. She fights for the vulnerable where I might be tempted to accept the status quo. She has made me a better king, and she has made this realm a better place." He turned to look at Clara, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "More than that," he said softly. "She has become the center of my world. I love her, I value her, I trust her judgment as I trust my own. And I want this court to understand that she is not a figurehead or a symbol. She is my queen in truth and in power. What she decrees, I will support. Who she protects, I will defend. Any threat to her is a threat to me." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I tell you this not as a political statement, though it is that. I tell you this because you deserve to know where your king stands. I stand with my wife now and always." He raised his glass to Queen Clara. "To Queen Clara," the hall echoed, voices overlapping, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She stood, her legs shaky, and raised her own glass. "To a realm built on justice," she said, her voice not quite steady, "and to a king wise enough to admit when he is wrong." Laughter rippled through the hall, and she saw Yavuz's mouth quirk in amusement. "And to a future," Clara continued, "where all of us, mortal and immortal alike, can live under fair law and honest rule. Together." She drank and the court drank with her, and when she sat back down, Yavuz took her hand and didn't let go for the rest of the evening. Later, when they were finally alone in her chambers, Clara collapsed onto the settee and covered her face with her hands. "That was the most terrifying thing I have ever done," she said, muffled. "You did beautifully." Yavuz sat beside her, pulling her hands away from her face. "The court needed to hear it. All of it. What if they turn against us? Some will, some already have. But many won't. Many have been waiting for a reason to support something better than the old ways. You have given them that reason." Clara leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They sat in comfortable silence for a long moment. "I've been thinking," Clara said finally, "about what you said yesterday, about the turning." She felt him go very still. "Yes, I want it," she said. "Not now, maybe. I need time to be certain. But eventually, yes, I want centuries with you, not decades. I want to build something lasting, something that outlives my mortal span." "You're certain?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the hope beneath it. "I'm certain. This realm needs work, needs reform, needs someone willing to fight for the vulnerable even when it's politically inconvenient. I can't do that work in 50 years. I need more time." She turned to look at him. "And selfishly, I need more time with you. Is that wrong?" "It is not wrong," Yavuz said quietly. "It is everything I hoped for but did not let myself expect. When should we do it? The turning? When you are ready. It is not an easy process. Painful, dangerous. You will need to be certain." "How long do I have to decide?" "As long as you want. The offer does not expire." He brushed a strand of hair back from her face. "But I would suggest we wait at least until the political situation stabilizes. The court is unsettled enough. Announcing your turning right now might cause more chaos than we can manage." Clara nodded. "That makes sense. We have time." "We do," Yavuz agreed. "All the time we need." They sat together until the candles burned low, talking about the future they would build, the reforms they would make, the life they would share. And for the first time since Clara had arrived in the vampire realm, she felt truly at home. The next few months were turbulent. Lord Casimir and Lady Isidore did not openly rebel, but they made their displeasure clear in 1,000 small ways. They questioned Clara's decisions in council meetings, spread rumors about her fitness to rule, and generally did everything they could to undermine her authority short of outright treason. Clara met each challenge head-on, with Yavuz's support. She continued to preside over disputes, manage mortal affairs, and slowly build her own base of power within the court. Mikhail, the boy she'd saved from execution, became her assistant and then her steward, managing her household with fierce loyalty. Gregor became an official advisor, helping her navigate vampire politics with the wisdom of his centuries. And through it all, her relationship with Yavuz deepened. They spent their evenings together, dining and talking and planning. Some nights they simply sat in companionable silence, reading or working on separate projects but enjoying each other's presence. Other nights they talked until dawn, sharing stories of their pasts, dreams for the future, observations about the court. Slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Clara learned that Yavuz had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was relaxed, that he loved music but rarely listened to it, that he had taken the throne in a violent coup 3 centuries ago, and still carried guilt for the deaths it had required. Yavuz learned that Clara had always been stubborn, that she'd spent her childhood reading law books because she'd found them more interesting than fairy tales, that she missed her younger sister desperately and wrote to her weekly. They argued sometimes, sharp debates that would have mortified the court if they'd known. But they argued in private and they always resolved it, and Clara came to treasure those moments as much as the peaceful ones. Because Yavuz never patronized her, never dismissed her opinions simply because she was younger or had less experience. He listened, he considered. And sometimes he changed his mind, just as she sometimes changed hers. Spring came, and with it a thaw in more than just the weather. The court began to settle into the new reality. Clara was not going anywhere. Yavuz supported her completely, and slowly, grudgingly, even some of her detractors began to accept that perhaps the mortal queen had value after all. It was on a warm spring evening that Clara made her decision. She and Yavuz were walking in the castle gardens, a rare moment of leisure. The sun had set an hour ago, and the first stars were emerging. Yavuz could tolerate brief exposure to sunset and sunrise, though full daylight would burn him. It was one of many things Clara had learned about vampire physiology. "I'm ready," Clara said without preamble. Yavuz stopped walking. "Ready for what?" "The turning. I want to do it." He studied her face carefully. "You're certain?" "There is no rush, Clara. We have time." "I'm certain," she said. "I've been thinking about it for months. I've read everything in the library about the process. I've talked to vampires who underwent willing turning. I know the risks. And I still want it." "Why now?" Clara considered the question. "Because the court is stable enough to handle it. Because I'm tired of feeling like my mortality is a weakness they can exploit. Because I want to start our real life together, without the shadow of eventual loss hanging over us." She took his hands. "And because I love you and I want forever with you, however complicated forever might be." Yavuz's expression softened. "You have thought this through." "I have. So when can we do it?" "Soon," he said. "I'll need to prepare. The turning requires planning, careful conditions. It is not something to rush." "How long?" "A month perhaps, maybe less if all goes well." He pulled her close. "Are you frightened?" "Terrified," Clara admitted, "but also excited." "Is that strange?" "No," Yavuz said. "It is perfectly natural. You are choosing transformation, choosing a new life. Fear and excitement often walk together." They stood in the garden as night deepened around them, and Clara felt peace settle over her. This was right. This was the future she wanted. A month later, on the longest night of summer, Clara underwent the turning. Yavuz had prepared a chamber deep in the castle, away from prying eyes. Only a handful of trusted servants knew what was happening. The court had been told the queen was ill, resting, not to be disturbed. "Last chance to change your mind," Yavuz said as Clara lay down on the prepared bed. "I'm not changing my mind," Clara said firmly. "It will hurt. I will do everything I can to ease the process. But the transformation itself is painful." "I know, I'm ready." He sat beside her, took her hand. "I love you. Hold on to that when it becomes difficult." "I love you too," Clara whispered. The turning itself was a blur of agony and ice, of her body remaking itself at a fundamental level. Yavuz stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand, speaking soft reassurances in a language she didn't understand but found comforting anyway. It lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, Clara woke to find the world transformed. Colors were sharper, sounds clearer. She could hear conversations happening 3 floors away. She could smell the blood of the servants as they passed in distant corridors, and she was hungry, so hungry it hurt. "Easy," Yavuz said. He was sitting beside the bed as if he'd never left. Perhaps he hadn't. "The hunger is normal. We'll feed you carefully, slowly. You'll learn control." Clara sat up, and the movement was smoother than it should have been, faster. She looked down at her hands. Her skin was pale, not the warm brown it had been, but the white luminescence of moonlight. Her nails looked sharper. Everything felt different and yet fundamentally herself. "How do you feel?" Yavuz asked. Clara considered the question. "Strong," she said finally. "And hungry, but also myself." "That normal?" "Perfectly normal. The turning enhances what you are. It does not replace it. You are still Clara. You will always be Clara. Just more so." She looked at him, and with her new vampire vision she could see details she'd never noticed before. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his hair caught the candlelight, the inhuman beauty that was common to all vampires but somehow unique in him. "You're staring," he said, amused. "You're beautiful. I knew that before, but now I can really see it." "Flattery will not distract me from feeding you," Yavuz said. "Come, carefully now." He helped her stand, and Clara marveled at the steadiness of her legs. She felt like she could run for miles without tiring, like she could fight an army single-handedly. "That feeling will fade once you learn your new limits," Yavuz said, reading her expression. "For now, focus on walking without moving too quickly. You're stronger than you realize. You could put your hand through a wall by accident." Clara concentrated and managed to cross the room without destroying anything. Success. The feeding was strange and difficult, but Yavuz guided her through it with patience. They used donated blood from willing mortal subjects, carefully measured doses. Clara's new instincts screamed for more, but Yavuz was firm, helping her learn control from the start. "The hunger never fully goes away," he explained, "but you will learn to manage it, to channel it. It becomes background noise rather than overwhelming need." It took a week before Clara was steady enough to face the court. When she did, walking into the grand hall on Yavuz's arm with her new white hair and luminous skin, the reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Shock, disbelief, and from Casimir and Isadora, barely concealed horror. Our queen has chosen transformation, Yavuz announced. She is vampire now, immortal as we are, and she will rule alongside me, not for decades but for centuries. Any who questioned her fitness, her legitimacy, her permanence must now reconsider. She is one of us, fully, finally, forever. The court erupted in a mix of applause and consternation. Clara held her head high and let them react. She was past caring what they thought. That night, in their shared chambers, finally truly shared after months of careful distance, Yavuz held her and said, "No regrets." "None," Clara said firmly. "This was the right choice. Even though it means leaving your mortal life behind, your family?" "My sister knows. I wrote to her before the turning. She understands even if she doesn't like it, and I can still see her, still write to her. I haven't lost her." Clara traced patterns on his chest. "I've gained everything I wanted, a purpose, a partner, a life I can be proud of." "And me?" he asked quietly. "Especially you," Clara said, and kissed him. The years that followed were not easy. Casimir and Isadora continued to cause trouble until finally, in a move that surprised everyone, they attempted a formal challenge to Yavuz's rule. It was an ancient rite, rarely invoked, and it required a trial by combat. Yavuz fought Casimir personally and won, though not without injury. The challenge ended with Casimir's exile and Isadora's submission. The faction that had opposed Clara's influence crumbled. In its place, slowly, Clara and Yavuz built something better. She established a formal legal code for mortal-vampire relations, enshrining protections for human subjects. She created a council specifically to address mortal concerns, ensuring they had a voice in the governance of the realm. She reformed the blood stores system, making it more transparent and eliminating the opportunity for corruption. And through it all, Yavuz supported her. Sometimes he led, sometimes he followed, but they always worked together. Their partnership became legendary, whispered about in vampire courts across the continent. The king who had ruled alone for 3 centuries, and the mortal queen who had become immortal to stand beside him. Mikhail grew into a capable administrator, eventually taking over management of the entire mortal affairs department. Gregor became Yavuz's primary military advisor, and the court slowly transformed into something that resembled the vision Clara had first glimpsed when she'd argued for that boy's life in the Grand Hall. A realm where justice mattered, where law protected rather than oppressed, where mortals and immortals could coexist not in fear but in mutual respect. It was a cold autumn evening, 20 years after Clara's turning, that they decided it was time. "Time for what?" Clara asked, looking up from the legal brief she was reviewing. "A progress," Yavuz said. "Through the vampire cities, we have been ruling from this castle for 2 decades. It is time the other courts saw us, saw what we have built, and understood that this is the future." Clara set aside her papers. A political tour, a royal progress, ancient tradition. The king and queen travel through their realm, showing themselves to their subjects, hearing petitions, demonstrating power. He paused. "It is also a way of marking territory, of reminding the other vampire lords that this region belongs to us and our rule is secure." How long would it take? 6 months, perhaps longer. We would visit every major vampire city from here to the northern border. Clara considered it. The work here was stable enough. Mikhail could handle daily operations in her absence, and the thought of seeing the broader realm, of meeting the vampires beyond this mountain hold, was appealing. "Let's do it," she said. They departed on a crisp evening in late autumn, just as the first frost touched the ground. A small retinue accompanied them, guards, advisors, servants. But Clara and Yavuz rode at the front, side by side, equals in power and presence. The first vampire city they reached was built into a cliff face overlooking a deep valley. The local lord, a vampire named Constantine, received them formally but with evident curiosity. Clara could see him studying her, trying to reconcile the stories he'd heard with the reality before him.
"The mortal queen who became immortal,"
he said during the welcoming feast. "The tales of your transformation have spread far, your majesty." "I hope not too far," Clara said dryly. "Some stories should remain private." Constantine laughed. "What I hear is this. You argued with the king in front of his entire court." He listened, and that single moment changed everything. "It was more complicated than that," Clara said. "Was it, or was it exactly that simple?" Constantine leaned forward. "We have ruled through fear for so long, we vampires. Fear of the sun, fear of discovery, fear of each other. Your husband built something different here, a realm based on law rather than terror. But law without mercy is just another kind of terror. You showed him that. You showed all of us." Clara glanced at Yavuz, who was deep in conversation with another lord. "I only did what seemed right at the time." "Right is not the same as easy," Constantine said. "You chose right when easy would have been to stay silent. That is why the stories spread." The progress continued. City after city, court after court. Clara heard petitions from mortals and vampires alike, settled disputes, and met with local administrators. Everywhere she went, she heard versions of the same story. The mortal queen who had challenged the vampire king. The king who had listened. The court that had been silenced by their first argument. and then transformed by its outcome. It was strange, Clara thought, how a single moment could become legend. How that one decision in the Grand Hall had rippled outward, changing not just their court but the broader vampire world. You changed things, Yavuz said to her one evening as they rode between cities. More than you realize. We changed things, Clara corrected. You started it, you stood up and demanded better. I only followed where you led. You let me lead, Clara said. That took courage too. You could have dismissed me, overruled me, reminded everyone that you were the ancient vampire king and I was the mortal bride. But you didn't, because you were right, Yavuz said simply. And I was tired of being alone in my certainty. You gave me something I had not had in 300 years. What a partner, he said. Someone to challenge me, to sharpen me, to make me better than I would have been alone. Clara reached across the space between their horses and took his hand. I love you, I know, he said, and the warmth in his voice made her smile. The progress ended in spring as they returned to their mountain hold. The castle looked the same, but somehow Clara saw it differently now. This was home, truly home. Not just the place where she lived, but the center of a life she had chosen and built with the vampire beside her. Worth it? Yavuz asked as they dismounted in the courtyard. Every moment, Clara said. They walked into the castle together, and Clara felt the satisfaction of knowing they had time, centuries of time, to build, to reform, to create the just realm they both dreamed of. To rule together, argue together, love together. It would not always be easy. There would be more challenges, more opposition, more moments of crisis. But they would face them side by side as they had faced everything since that first argument in the Grand Hall. The argument that had silenced the court, the argument that had changed everything. The argument that had led them here, to this life, to this love, to this forever. Clara looked at Yavuz, her husband, her partner, her king. He looked back, and in his eyes she saw the same certainty she felt. This was right. This was where they belonged. Together always.